so thank you very much for this opportunity. As Amir before me, I have to recognize that I know nothing about theology or anything related to moral philosophy. So I will try to do what I know, which is to be an economist. And I will try to describe a bit different type of inequality, what most economists think about it, how most economists dismiss it, and why I don't think I want to dismiss it, and some reasons to think about it in a slightly different way. So, first of all, I think that many people have seen this picture by Saez and Piketty showing the behavior of the share of before tax income flowing to households in the top 1% of the income distribution, and how this has increased dramatically in the last 20 years or 30 years, mapping levels not seen since the early 20s. Now, what is important is that the focus here is on pre-tax current income. And people have questioned whether this is the right measure of inequality, first of all, because this is before taxation, and taxation can and does address this in part. In part is because it's a notion of current income and not lifetime. If I am a law student or a PhD in finance, I don't make a lot of money today, but my lifetime income is quite good, and so that's not so worrisome. And what matters is income or consumption or even wealth. I want to stick to pre-tax income because this is, in my view, the best measure of the firmness of our economic system. There is a different thing how we can redistribute with taxation, but before we think about the redistribution, the issue is, does the economic system produce an outcome that we think is more or less desirable, and what has changed in that? And if you care about how the pre and after tax income change over time, this is a picture to face this. Now, when we think about income inequality, we mostly think about two completely different things. One is the disproportionate growth in income of the top 1% of the population, and even making even the top 0.01%. The second is the lack in growth in median income. The two are not necessarily linked. They can happen separately. I think that from an economic point of view, the most problematic one is the second, not the first. In fact, as economists, I know this might sound like strange here, but as economists, what we think that we need some inequality to produce incentives, to innovate, to produce. And so inequality is not per se a bad word. What is a bad word is the fact that the growth that is produced is not enjoyed by more than 50% of the population. And in fact, I think that this is, to my view, the most shocking picture, because this is the real per capita income growth by group from 1980 to 2008. Now notice that the black line is the average. Okay, so the average is slightly better off 30 years later. If you look at the bottom 90% of distribution, that's even flatter. And most of the growth has been enjoyed by, you can go increasingly the top 1%, the top 0.1%, and so on and so forth. So what I want to first sort of discuss is how is it possible that income for the median worker did not go up? Now, one picture that I came across, and I think a lot of people have seen, that seems to suggest this, is the following. This picture shows in the sort of continuous line the average real weekly earnings of workers, and the dashed line is the productivity of the business sector. And I say, up to 1975, the two are going hands in hands. And in 1975, there is a structural break, and all of a sudden, the earnings stop, and the productivity keep going. So, what happened during that period that created this wedge that is to this day a big source of problem?
Now, I don't want to bother you too much with the details, but if you look at this slightly revised picture, what I've done is first, the flat line is take-home earnings, the dotted line is compensation. So part of the reason why the stuff is flat is because there is an increasing gap between take-home earnings and cost for the employees, for the companies. So what is that gap? The gap is mostly cost of healthcare. Employees don't take over their paycheck the cost of healthcare, but companies do pay the cost of that healthcare as a cost. So they can't increase wages too much because they have to pay for that. But workers don't see that and get upset. And so not half of it, but a significant component of this is driven by the cost of healthcare, which is a topic I will return in a minute. The second issue is even more esoteric, is the way those series are deflated. So one series is deflated with the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, the normal deflator that we use. The productivity number is deflated at the implicit deflator of the GDP, a different kind of deflator that does not take into consideration some sort of non-market product, including healthcare and tuition. When we deflate productivity by that, the two numbers are closer. Now, if you look in the 2000, there is still a gap between the two. So we're not saying that that explains the entire amount. However, a lot of that amount is basically linked to the fact that the healthcare sector is too expensive, and to some extent, the tuition is too expensive. Now, the benign explanation, most economists like to dismiss entirely the problem of the top 1% growing so greatly by attributing to things that are not under the control of most anybody. And so they push it outside of the discipline of economics so that they have nothing to say about it. And so the benign explanation is that the reason why we observe such a enormous growth in income for the top 1% is a combination of globalization and technology that leads to what a late colleague of ours, very much missed, Sherwin Rosen, was labeling as superstar economy. Now, to give you an idea of how the superstar economy plays, I will venture into something I know even less than religion, which is golf. Okay? So this is the Augusta Masters that I'm told is the most important golf competition in the United States and in the world. Now, in 1948, the price to win the Masters was simply $2,500. Okay? Even in today's dollar would be $22,000. In 2008, the same price was $1,350,000. So, see something that has nothing to do with unions, nothing to do with corporate governance, nothing to do with taxation, nothing to do with anything except two facts. Number one, this game is a game that used to be watched by few people locally, and now in Japan they wake up early in the morning to see this master tournament. And so in 1948, the first prize was only 3 times the annual salary of a greenskeeper. And in 2008 was 103. So we have heard so many times the difference between the income of the CEOs and the income of the workers. The problem is much broader than just in companies. Here we have sort of golf players that suffer the same phenomenon. And this ratio has increased constantly over the last 60 years, but really accelerated in the last 30 years, precisely like that curve that we saw. Now, it's interesting that not only the price sort of increased disproportionately, it also increases proportionally vis-a-vis the second and third price. So if you look at the ratio between the first price and the third price, that ratio increases over time. which is exactly what Sheldon Rosen was calling superstar economy. There is a huge prize to be the first, and in a larger market, this gives you larger rents, and being second is not as fun. And I sort of kept some of the stuff, but to give you a sense of where the money is coming, in 1966, a spectator could purchase a ticket to the Masters the day of the event. Since 1972, there's been a waiting list. In 2000, they stopped accepting new names to the waiting list. And the list price of the ticket is $175, but the market price is between $1,500 and $5,000. Now, if you wonder why they don't maximize, it's because the master is run by sort of a cooperative, and they actually enjoy discrimination, so women were not accepted until recently, and they don't try to maximize revenues. But the most important thing is basically today 170 countries watch this sport, and they don't want to watch the third or the fourth player, they want to watch the first player. So this creates a discontinuity. The first player in a larger market make a disproportionate amount of money. And that's true in every sort of area, particularly in sport. And the number I quoted don't include endorsement. If you look at endorsement, when Tiger Woods was sort of at the top of the game, before he was distracted by other things, he was making 12 millions in winning and 100 million in endorsement. Okay? The second male golfer was making only 47 million endorsement. The third was below 15. So you see the return drops dramatically in this field. So this is let me stop a second. So this is the benign explanation. I think that there is a lot of truth in this benign explanation. However, I think that it is a bit too easy for us to say this is caused by something else. There's nothing to do with what we study, and there's nothing we can do. I think that there is a non-benign explanation. Let me give you two examples of this non-benign explanation. So Carlos Slim is one of the richest men in the world. Last year lost $2 billion in wealth. Now don't feel too bad because I think he has another 20 or 30 left, so he's not that exactly poor. But why did he lose $2 billion? Because Brazil and Mexico, two markets in which he has sort of telecommunication companies, deregulated the sector, increased competition, reduced prices. So basically, Carlos Slim was getting $2 billion out of consumers in those two markets. That's really a massive redistribution from the man to the field. Another example is Michael Eisner. He was CEO of Disney for much of the late 80s and all the 90s. And he walked away at the end of his career with $1 billion in wealth. Okay, so now he did a lot of things, but the most remarkable thing that he did was to lobby Congress to increase the copyright life for Mickey Mouse. You know, it used to be that the life of the copyright lasted only 50 years since the death of the author. I think Disney died in 67, if I'm not mistaken. So the expiration was coming near. And before the expiration was coming near, Michael Eisner started a massive campaign saying we should extend copyright rights to 7 years. And not only succeeded in doing that in the United States, he succeeded in doing that in Europe, I think throughout the world, even in Argentina. I was in Argentina last December. Argentina so far has not been particularly friendly to the United States, but they extended the Mickey Mouse franchise. Now, because we as economists, we think that copyrights have a value because motivate people to work harder. But Walt Disney is that. Extending his franchise is not going to make him produce more nice cartoons. So the only thing that it does is transfer resources to all the people who go to Disney World, to the pockets. We like to think to the pocket of shareholders, but many went to the pockets of Michael Eisner himself. So again, is an example of massive redistribution from the many to the few. So to what extent income inequality is not due to technology or globalization, but is due to distortion in competition. And if that's the case, there is a very dangerous vicious circle, because we know that once you are very wealthy, you can get a lot of political influence through donation. And these are numbers that the Stifel Center here at Chicago has just produced on the concentration of large donors in the campaign of various candidates. And you see that with the exception of Sanders and Trump, all the major candidates have a disproportionate amount of money from people that donated more than $5,000 or more than $100,000. Now, if you're passionate about politics, I can see a rich person donating a few $1,000s just out of passion. I don't think that anybody donates $100,000 just for the sake of it. I believe that the only reason why somebody donates $100,000 is to buy access, to buy influence. And so the result is that these candidates are bought by the very people that are making a lot of money. And why they can afford to make a lot of money? Because they're political influence. So this might create a vicious circle between distortion in competition, monopolies that generate income inequality, generate the money to rent seat or to lobby, and this increases the distortion in competition. I think this is a vicious circle. You have to give me 2 extra minutes. There is one person missing. So this is the sort of vicious circles I feel we are going down in America. And is there any evidence for this? I'm trying to accumulate evidence. Now, what is interesting is if you look at the industries where sort of the 0.1% is most concentrated, they tend to be finance, lawyers, and athletes. All of those are industries that either are at the top of the lobbying list, finance and lawyers, or they are even exempted from antitrust. I always joke that in Europe, the only thing that is competitive is soccer. In the United States, I used to say the only thing that is not competitive is sport. Now there are a lot of other things more non-competitive, but unlike in Europe, where sport is completely competitive, in the United States, not only is not competitive, it's exempted from competition. Who is going to get the rent? The owner and the athletes. So those rents are not driven only by technology globalization, are driven by bad institutions. A second thing that is very preliminary, but I wanted to say, can we explain why the wage of the middle class is not rising? Real wage is a component of 2 things. It's a component of nominal wage and a component of the deflator. Our prices increase. So is it possible that real wages are not rising because in some sector the prices are rising too much? And here what I did is a correlation between how much lobbying there is in a sector and how much was the price increase in that sector in the last 25 years. And why it's not a strong correlation, the slope is statistically significant, and you can see that some sectors, like medical care, cable and satellite television, increase much more than the average, and surprise, surprise, are also the sector where the lobby is most intense. So, concluding, economists have tended to ignore or downplay the effects of income inequality. The few who don't have only one fix: taxation. So if you read Piketty, you say the answer is 90% tax rate. Now, taxation can resolve the ex post income differences, but it doesn't resolve the increasing pre-tax income differences. So what has exploded in the last 30 years has not been the after-tax income inequality, it's been the pre-tax income inequality. So we need to think about what happened that caused this. And I think the pre-tax incomes differences are much more important for lobbying, rent-seeking, and political consensus. We don't want to be in a society in which 90% of the people live off 10%. This is not healthy from any point of view. So taxation will only fix the after-tax problem, will not fix the pre-tax problem. I want to fix the pre-tax problem, and I think that the income inequality is the result of market distortion, not of market forces. We need to address those distortions, not redistribute ex post. How? Why don't we start to enforce better the antitrust, to reduce the bias to entry embedded in most regulation, and to reduce the power of money in politics. Thank you.
Let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back to the moderated conversation and ask questions.